Bingo is Wednesday at Hillsborough Rehab at 2 o'clock, and she needs some more volunteers, and the sign-up is on the bulletin board.
One announcement that I forgot to make, at least it slipped away from my brain in the excitement of getting the palm fronds going, is to recognize that our friend Bob Mullins is back at worship with us today after a long recuperation. It is good to see you back. So, what are you going to do because you don't have to do anything? That's the regular question for Lutherans and for Christians, for all those who follow Jesus. What are you going to do? Because you don't have to do anything. We live in interesting times. We can insure most anything against most anything that might possibly happen. We're bombarded with all the things we can do to guarantee our financial future, the creams that will take away the wrinkles under our eyes and above our eyebrows, and heaven forbid we should go through life with a double chin. We can protect ourselves against the ravages of disease. We would like to protect ourselves against the ravages of life in the world around us, from terrorism, from natural disasters. But then Jesus says, not only can't you do anything to save yourselves, but you don't have to do anything, because I am doing it. I have done it. You are saved, not of your own doing, but it's yours. So what are we going to do when we don't have to do anything? Today is Palm Sunday. Today is Passion Sunday. Today starts the whole drama of Holy Week. Jesus enters into Jerusalem, and we know what's going to happen. When we gather together and wave our palms and celebrate the entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, the moment when he confronts the world with what it's going to cost to save us, we dramatize the moment when Jesus crosses the line. He enters Jerusalem, the seat of all authority, religious and secular. The high priest and the Roman governor, they're all waiting for Jesus to come into the city. Jesus goes. He enters the holy city. He confronts the world. And he knows that the world can and must respond. He knows that what he represents challenges everything the world is about. He knows that the world will fight fiercely to keep things as they are. Well, this morning, I want to talk to you about the lifestyle that I believe Jesus invites us to. One that he commits himself to when he enters the holy city. It's one in which we discover ourselves, who we really are, and what we really value. It's a lifestyle in which we find Jesus in a way that we cannot find in any other way. It's a life that is defined by a Jesus who is willing to go to the city. It is a lifestyle defined by Jesus who goes to the garden to pray And Scripture so dramatically describes it. As he prayed, he sweat as though drops of blood that fell to the ground. And he said, Father, not my will, but your will. He is the one who refuses to engage the world on the world's terms. Instead, he comes on his terms, riding on the colt, riding on the blankets, the cloaks of his disciples. He comes to Jerusalem where he will die, but he will die on his terms, and he will rise on his terms. The Gospel of Mark, Jesus tells a story. He sat down opposite the treasury and he watched the crowd that was putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, each of which were worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and he said to them, Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. The widow, the one already living on the edge of life, not the rich people who had everything they needed and abundance beyond that, but the widow is the one who was willing to let go and let God. It was abundantly clear to the widow that her status and her wealth, or the lack of, could not hold her up. There was nothing she could do, nothing she could give, nothing she could build, nowhere she could go that would save her. But she knew that God could save her, and she knew that God would save her. She was willing and able to let salvation lie outside of herself, to lie in the actions of another, one who would go to Jerusalem, one for whom we would wave palm fronds, and one of whom we would cry, crucify him. Her giving was not proportionate. She didn't tithe. She gave it all. We don't even have a word for that. You can give a tithe. You can give a fifth. You can give half. You can give 3/4. I suppose we can say you gave it all, but we really don't have a descriptive word for that. Her giving wasn't based on the size of the building debt, and she was trying to help pay it off. Her giving was not going to be the amount they needed to bring that new young priest down from Nazareth. Her giving was of her whole heart and of her whole self. She was one who truly said, "Here I am, Lord." James McCord, who was the president emeritus of Princeton Theological School, told the story about a man who complained to him that he was never going back to a particular church because all they ever talked about in that church was give, give, give. Now, he doesn't say in the story that it was about toilet paper, but you can say that of me here, okay? Dr. McCord commented, "I can't think of a better definition of Christianity than give, give, give. To give all, to say, here I am, Lord. Here are my 2 pennies. Here's everything I have. Here's everything I am. Here I am, Lord." It's not the repetitiveness of the giving. It's the wholeness of the giving. It is not when we say, "That's all I can spare this week, Lord. I'll do better next week." It is, "Here I am, Lord." It is the words of Jesus in the garden. "Not my will, but your will." Now, having said that, I'm like every other pastor. I worry about whether we ask too much, whether we ask too often. Should we shorten our list? Who should we take off the list? Heifer International, LSSI and their foster care, toilet paper for the pantries, Habitat, Elizabeth Ann Seton for babies, and many, many other things. Ladles of love, all of the things that we give. And there's always more. But I'm always drawn back to Dr. McCord's words. What better definition is there of the church than that we are a people who say, "Here I am, Lord. Here I am." The idea that we would somehow say no to human need because we've already done our share, or that we might hold back because, after all, it's better to save for a rainy day. Those just don't stand up when we look at the one who rode into Jerusalem, giving it all so we would have nothing to do. I can't reconcile that model of Jesus with anything other than giving of self. All of ourselves. When we go to the holy city, when we go to the powers that be, whether they be religious or secular, and we say, "Here I am. This is the way of the Lord." Giving is about the kind of person we seek to be and the image that we hold before our children and ourselves. Some of you have heard this story before. Dr. Dale, who taught education at Ohio State, tells a story about a teacher in Pittsburgh who was having the members of her class tell her what they were going to become when they grew up. Most of the class had given their answers, and they were the ones that we would hope for as proud parents and as proud teachers. They talked about being doctors and nurses and farmers, helpful people. All of them chose specific vocations. They were just about done when the superintendent of the schools stopped in to observe this class on this day. The teacher was caught in a quandary because the only student left to answer was little Johnny. And Johnny, you never knew what Johnny was going to say. The teacher knew Johnny wasn't the brightest. She figured he'd probably say something really stupid. She toyed with the idea of just passing over, not asking Johnny at all, pretending he wasn't there. But her idea of fairness won out, and so she put the question to Johnny, "Johnny, tell us, what are you going to do when you grow up?" Johnny replied, "When I grow up, I'm going to lead a blind man. When I grow up, I'm going to lead a blind man." I spent, as you know, a number of years working in the hospital environment. I worked a lot with areas of life that a lot of people aren't terribly comfortable around. I responded to every death in the hospital, and I worked with organ donation, and I worked with autopsy consents, and I saw people in distress in the emergency room. It was challenging. It was different. It was something that was hard to talk about with a lot of people who aren't in that area of life. But it was what I did, and I enjoyed what I did. What I didn't realize was how closely I was being watched by my children. They had an exercise in class one day talking about the concept of heroes. They were asked to name people that they considered to be heroes. They told me about this class, and when I asked my son who he had named, and I kind of had my fingers crossed that it would be Martin Luther King or Abraham Lincoln, or maybe in a great moment of religious awareness, they might say Jesus. But Jeff said, "Well, I named you because you help people when really awful things are happening to them." Now, I share that story not to build myself up, but to remind us how closely the world watches us, how closely our children watch us, how closely our neighbors watch us. We've talked in the midweek Lenten study groups about how do we let people know what Lutherans are about. When people look at St. Paul's, what do they see? Do they see people who believe that we don't have to do anything because Jesus has done it all? Or are we like Dr. S.'s son, who, when I was taking him around to look over my shoulder and see what a chaplain did, and I asked him why he wanted to be a doctor, and he said, "Well, it's pretty simple for me. It's the best way I know to make the kind of money I want to have, to live the life that I want to have." What we give and what we get. Here I am, Lord. And what do we get? What do giving and getting do to us and to those around us? Do we rely upon being people of abundance before we give? Or do we give the abundance of our spirit? Do we give ourselves? Do we place ourselves on the road to Jerusalem along with Jesus? Do we show our willingness to go? Now, for some folks, life consists of looking for those small windows of life when we've paid our college debts, our kids are through college, our retirement fund is solid, and our bodies are not yet declining, and then we say, now I can give. Or is the giving that Jesus invites us to something different? Do we find it in the impoverished widow? The kind of giving that comes from the knowledge that we are the recipients of the greatest giving of all, the one who went to Jerusalem, the one who says to us, you don't have to do anything because I've done it for you. And then he leaves to us how we shall respond. Will we lift up the needs of God's creation? Will we do what we can for others? Will we give it all? Because we don't have to do anything. So what are you going to do when you don't have to do anything? Amen.